Okay, let's try a little thought experiment. If you think of democracy as a computer, what's its operating system? I'd argue it's political parties. They're the software that runs the whole show. And just like any OS, they can be absolutely brilliant, but man, can they have some serious bugs. So today, we're going to pop the hood on the Indian political landscape and try to debug the system.
And that brings us to this huge question, right? We all know political parties run the country. But who runs the parties themselves? The answer to that question, well, it tells you pretty much everything you need to know about the health of a democracy. So, let's start with the basics. What even is a political party? At its heart, it's a team. A group of people who basically agree on how the country should be run and what policies would make things better for everyone. They organize, they compete in elections, and their goal is to win power so they can actually put those ideas into action.
But why do we even need them? I mean, couldn't we do without them? Well, just try to imagine a political system with no parties. Every single candidate running for office would be an independent. Think about the chaos. No one could make any big promises on major policies because they'd have no team to help them pass laws. And maybe most important, when things go wrong, who do you hold accountable? It would be impossible. So yeah, for a big representative democracy to even function, parties are absolutely essential.
But that operating system we talked about? Well, it's flashing some serious error messages. It's time to get real about the major glitches and challenges facing political parties in India today. These are the bugs in the system that are slowing everything down. We're going to break this down into 4 critical challenges. First, a real lack of democracy inside the parties. Second, this huge problem of dynastic succession. Third, the growing, and I mean growing, influence of money and muscle power. And finally, this feeling that a lot of voters have that there's no real, meaningful choice anymore.
All right, let's dive into that first bug, the lack of internal democracy. What we see across the board is that power gets concentrated in the hands of just one or a few leaders at the very top. These parties often don't keep proper membership records, they rarely hold regular internal meetings, and forget about fair, open elections for party leadership. So what happens? The average party member is left in the dark, with basically zero say. And loyalty to the leader becomes way more important than loyalty to the party's actual ideals.
And you know where that leads, right? When a few people at the top hold all the cards, it paves the way for our second major challenge, dynastic succession. It creates a system that's just built on unfair advantage.
It becomes a bit like a family business. Leaders start promoting people who are close to them, and yep, that often means family members. Soon enough, you see top positions in the party being passed down within a single family. Now, this is not only deeply unfair to other hardworking members, it's just plain bad for democracy. You end up with people in positions of immense power who might have no real experience or popular support.
So, if it's not always about principles, experience, or what the public wants, what actually makes someone a candidate? Well, you have the ideal candidate on one hand, but then you have the reality of what parties call the winnable candidate. And what winnable means? Well, it's often something very different from the ideal.
And that brings us to challenge number 3, the massive and growing role of money and muscle power. Since the main goal for parties is just to win elections any way they can, they often look for shortcuts. They'll nominate candidates not because they're the best, but because they can raise a ton of money. And in some pretty scary cases, they'll even back candidates with criminal connections, all because they think that person can deliver the win. This quote right here just nails our fourth and final challenge. When all the parties are chasing the same kind of winnable candidates and the same sources of funding, they all start to, well, look and sound the same. And the result for you, the voter? It feels like there's no meaningful choice. The big parties end up having really similar policies, especially on the economy. The differences are just in the little details. And then you see the same leaders hopping from one party to another. It's like you're being asked to choose between 3 doors, but they all lead to the exact same room.
Okay, so that's a pretty bleak picture of the bugs in the system. But here's the good news. People know about these problems, and there have been some serious efforts to fix them. So let's talk about the road to reform and how we can start debugging this OS. So one of the biggest issues that really kickstarted the reform process was something called defection. Imagine this. You vote for a candidate from a certain party. They win. And then, the day after the election, they switch to the rival party, usually because they were offered a ministerial job or a big bag of cash. It's a total betrayal of the voters.
So how do you fight these bugs? Well, there's been a 3-pronged attack.
First, the Constitution was actually amended to include an anti-defection law. Now it's simple. If you're an elected MP or MLA and you switch parties, you lose your seat. End of story. Next, the Supreme Court stepped in to fight the money and muscle power. It's now mandatory for every candidate to file a public document detailing all their assets and any criminal cases against them. And finally, the Election Commission has been pushing back, ordering parties to actually hold internal elections and file their income tax returns.
But look, those fixes are just a start. There are a ton of other reforms that experts are pushing for. Things like a brand new law that would actually regulate the internal workings of political parties to make them more democratic. There are also strong calls to require parties to give at least a third of their election tickets to women candidates. And a big one, having the state fund elections to try and get that private, dark money out of politics.
Now, new laws and court orders are great. They're one really important part of the solution. But there is another force for change, one that might be even more powerful. And that force is you. It's us. Public pressure is absolutely critical in this whole process.
So how does that actually work in the real world? Well, ordinary citizens, different pressure groups, and the media can put immense pressure on the system. It happens through petitions, getting thousands of people to demand change. It happens through publicity, shining a bright light on the problem so parties can't hide. And sometimes it happens through agitations and protests.
At the end of the day, it really boils down to this single powerful idea. Political parties are obsessed with one thing more than anything else: getting and keeping public support. If they start to feel that they will actually lose our support by not changing their ways, well, that's when they'll get serious about reform.
So, that leaves us right here, with one final thought. The real power to force these parties to debug their own system, it lies with us, the public. Knowing that, the question isn't just what needs to be fixed,